Well, as we close out yet another policy orientation for the Texas legislature, I want to express my gratitude to all of you for being here, for supporting liberty. Thank you for being engaged citizens, and thank you most of all for all of your work for Texas. I've said it time and time again in the past year, out in America, it's a new day, with new possibilities and so much new potential. Even after a year in office, and even longer since the most consequential presidential election of the past generation, I can't help but be excited and also a little bit amazed about our country's path and the chance we have to set things right that have needed it for so very long. Make no mistake, the challenges facing our nation are sometimes daunting. Federal regulations need dramatic rollbacks to ensure American innovation is not strangled. The federal workforce needs wholesale reform to ensure it works for rather than against the will of the American people. Higher education needs a thoroughgoing revision to render an effective and accountable to the citizenry. Primary education needs an influence of market principles to ensure quality and choice and opportunity to all Americans. Healthcare needs a return to consumer-based principles free of government interference. And welfare needs a return to its original purpose as a temporary aid to Americans in need rather than a permanent way of life. Talk about a little bit more on that. The list, of course, goes on and on. Some people see it and ask themselves, what can be done? How can we possibly change all of this? But I think we in Texas see it a little bit differently. We see that list and we say, why not? This is the commonality of spirit and determination that unites all the distinguished speakers you've heard over the past 3 days. Jim DeMint with his record of real change and achievement, Steve Moore with his record of persuasive change-making in policy and media, even now as he is at CNN, Kent Hance with his civic-minded willingness and hysterical sense of humor, who served in the United States Congress and is an architect of the Reagan Revolution. Phil Gramm, there are no words. Phil Gramm, I have no words. There's nothing. Well, maybe your decades of public service and your really second to none defense of liberty and the fact that you're still in the fight is beyond amazing to me. Dan Patrick yesterday with his leadership on conservative priorities and taking Texas to the next level. George P. Bush this morning with his willingness to serve our country at war abroad and in public service at home and fight for our rights. Ken Paxton with his tireless dedication to the law and the interests of Texas. These are the stories of men who saw the need, understood the principles, and stepped themselves into the arena. To borrow Teddy Roosevelt's famous phrase, they are not only stepping into the arena, they are there and they will stay there. But it isn't just their story. They'll be the first to tell you that America and Texas is not the work nor the tale of just a few great men. It is the epic of an entire nation of greatness, men and women who fought a revolution, forged a civilization across a forbidding continent, and then set about the work of perfecting a society of liberty for themselves and for their children. We Texans are a people who remember that. We visit the Alamo and we look at the flags from every corner of the country and beyond, and we know with immediacy and certainty that those men died for us. We visit the Texas State Cemetery just a few blocks from here, and we see the graves of the heroes who took up arms or spoke out or litigated or led, all for freedom. And we understand that when they did, they were peering into a vast and unknowable future, fighting for descendants that they would never see. Looking back at them, that's us. We now have an opportunity and an obligation to fix America. And yes, to make it great again. Our role and responsibility in that is to expand Texas's own role as the laboratory for liberty, the place where freedom makes its case. Thank you. So, it is now my great honor to introduce to you the newest member of the Texas Public Policy Foundation family, Colonel Alan B. West. And before he comes up here, I want to tell you a little bit about what he's going to be doing. But first, a great American hero with us today, Alan West. Over a century ago, Booker T. Washington, the great educator and philanthropist, wrote in his memoir, Up from Slavery, of the dangers of dependency on government. He said, "Among a large class, there seemed to be a dependence on the government for every conceivable thing. The members of this class had little ambition to create a position for themselves, but wanted instead the federal officials," this was 100 years ago, y'all, wanted instead the federal officials to create one for them. How many times I wished then and have often wished since that by some power of magic I might remove the great bulk of these people into the country and plant them upon the soil. A start that at first may be slow and toilsome, but one that nevertheless is real. His words were meant to describe a portion, though a minority portion, of the African American population of that day. They resonate in our day as a critique of our nation at large, black, white, and beyond, in which dependency has grown too much, too fast, among too many. It doesn't affect the well-off or the well-connected much. After all, they have the insight and resources to contend with the effects of bad policy and limited liberty. That isn't the case for our fellow Americans, though, with fewer resources, with fewer connections, and with fewer options. It is for them and among them that the case for liberty is most compelling and most urgent. With our fellow citizens of minority descent enduring the most historical injustice and effects at the hands of bad and big government, whether through the evil intentions of racial discrimination, the benign intentions of government largesse, it is especially compelling for them. We who work for liberty every day have an obligation to recognize this and to do something about it. That's why today, I am privileged to announce that the Texas Public Policy Foundation is launching the Booker T. Washington Project, a nationwide effort to enact and expand liberty-based policies, especially for our Americans of minority descent. The Booker T. Project, well, it's exciting! The Booker T. Washington Project, which you will hear more about from Alan, but that project will focus upon education freedom to Americans so Americans can build their futures. It will focus on regulatory reform so Americans can build their dreams. It will focus on tax and welfare reform so Americans can live with dignity. It will focus on energy freedom so Americans can power their lives. It will focus on criminal justice reform so Americans can live in safety and security but have a second chance. And it will focus on healthcare reforms so Americans can obtain the care they need and deserve, and not just the Americans at the top of the socioeconomic ladder. As I mentioned, the Booker T. Washington Project of the Texas Public Policy Foundation will be helmed and headed by none other than the great Lieutenant Colonel Alan B. West. My friends, what a new day for liberty, what a new day for Texas. The last 3 days we have spent talking about the great effort to make America great again and how providential it is that Colonel Alan West will be joining our team to lead that effort for all Americans. Please help me welcome a former congressman from the 22nd District of Florida who was instrumental in the passage of many, many important acts in D.C., who served in the United States Army. I know he's going to make me stop. Retiring as a lieutenant colonel, receiving all kinds of awards and medals, and 22-year career. Oh, and is truly, in my opinion, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, articulators of liberty and freedom in the universe. Please help me welcome Colonel Allen West.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Please. Thanks so much, Brooke, and it's a pleasure and an honor to be here with you all today. Obviously, you know that I am not Senator Ted Cruz, but the left says that we can identify and be whoever we want. So I am a Hispanic senator of Cuban descent that represents the great state of Florida right now. That's who I want to be, so just bear with it. You know, what Brooke talked about is so near and dear to my heart, because just up the road is Fort Hood, Texas. And Fort Hood, Texas was my last duty assignment. And I graduated from the University of Tennessee. And if there's one thing that you know when you say that you're a Tennessee volunteer, you know why we have that moniker, the Volunteers. Because down the road was where Tennessee volunteers came and made that stand here in Texas for freedom and liberty. And so I'm honored to be here today to make that stand, and I'm honored to be a part of this great team. And Brooke, you just tell me where to go. I'm a fire and forget weapon system, and I'll make it happen. Senator Cruz was going to talk to you today about delivering for Texas under a conservative majority. And I want to talk about that ultimate goal. But I also want to remind you about an incredible battle that many times we don't talk about. It was the largest airborne operation known to man. It occurred in September of 1944. It was called Operation Market Garden. There were two different parts. Market was the airborne part. Garden was the launch of the 30th Armored Corps of the British Army. But it was very interesting because Market Garden was contingent upon several different bridges along one single road that had to be seized in order to get to the ultimate objective, which was to cross the Rhine River and go over into the industrial heart of Germany and therefore bring about the surrender of Germany. The problem was that the first bridge that the 82nd was supposed to take, they were delayed in securing that bridge. So the launch of the 30th Armored Corps was delayed. The second bridge, which the 101st Airborne Division was supposed to take, they also were delayed. That pushed the operation back a little bit further. And then, of course, when the 1st Airborne Division of the British Army jumped in at a place called Arnhem, they didn't realize that they were so deep behind enemy lines, and because of all the delays, the 30th Armored Corps was not able to link up with them at Arnhem. And a German Panzer Division counterattacked and captured the 1st Airborne Division of the British Army. The thing that we must come to understand is that if we are going to have a conservative majority, if we're going to make a difference for liberty here in the great state of Texas, we have to think like the other side does in those incremental bridges that we have to be able to secure before we get to that ultimate goal and objective. And the problem is that we have failed to understand and identify those ideological battles along the way that helps us to get to that final objective. See, I see where we are in the United States of America, it is no longer about being a Republican. It is no longer about being a Democrat. It all comes down to a philosophy of governance. It all comes down to the relationship between the individual and the institution of government. And if you understand the Declaration of Independence, if you read the Federalist Papers, if you understand the Constitution, this great nation was established with the individual and their sovereignty being preeminent over the institution of government. But unfortunately, what we see happening, and I will admit, sadly, with this budget deal that just came about last night or early in the morning hours, we see the growing institution of government suppressing the sovereignty, the liberty, and the independence of the individual. And somehow we have to go out there and make that case. Somehow we have to go out there and say that each and every time the government grows, you lose a little bit more of your liberty. You lose a little bit more of your freedom. You lose a little bit more of your ability to make the decisions that are necessary for you in your life. We need to go back and study John Locke and understand that incredible difference between divine rights theory and natural rights theory. When John Locke wrote about life, liberty, and property, Then Thomas Jefferson took that and made life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are inalienable rights to the individual that are not secured, not endowed to you through government, but it comes from our Creator God. One of the great lines that President Trump gave a week ago in his State of the Union address when he said that it is faith and family, not government and bureaucracy, that has made this country great. And if we can, the challenge for us is to take that message, as Brooke just articulated, not just to certain segments. We have to take that message all across the United States of America. Because my parents, being registered Democrats, raised me with some basic conservative principles and values of faith, of family, of individual responsibility, of quality education, of service to the nation, having a father that served in World War II in the European theater of operations. But we must stress to every single community, we must stress to every single demographic in the United States of America the simple word of liberty. Maybe some of y'all have seen this quote, but in April of 1864 at the Baltimore Sanitary Fair, Abraham Lincoln gave us this quote about liberty. He said, "The world has often looked for a good definition of liberty, and right now the American people are much in need of one. That we all declare for liberty, but we all do not mean the same thing in articulating the same word. For some, it may mean what men can do with themselves and the product of their own labor, while with others, it means what others can do with other men and the product of other men's labor." And he says that these two respective parties are using the same name, but they have completely different definitions and meanings. And he deduced that for one, it is truly liberty, but for the other, it is tyranny. See, my mother raised me with a very simple maxim. She said, self-esteem only comes from doing esteemable things. There is no self-esteem in sitting back and waiting for the largesse from government. And Alexander Fraser Tytler taught us that a democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It can only exist to a point in time when the voters realize they can vote their own largesse from the public treasury. From then on, the voters will always vote for the one that is promising them the most benefits, with the ensuing result being the collapse of a democracy over loose fiscal policy, followed by a dictatorship. That's where we are here in the United States of America. When I think about a president that came from the great state of Texas and the nightmare that he created under the auspices of the Great Society, when I think about when I was born in 1961, the two-parent household nationally in the black community was between 75 and 77%. But when all of a sudden Lyndon Baines Johnson said that a woman that has a child out of wedlock can receive a check from the government, no matter how many children she has out of wedlock, but there was a caveat. She cannot have a man in the home. So today, some 52 odd years later, the two-parent household in the black community is only 24%. But how often do we talk about these things? How often do we confront America and let them know that there is always something ugly about being dependent? There is something that is un-American about being dependent. There is something that erodes your liberty, your will, your determination, your drive to be free when it comes to economic dependence. And that's the message that has to emanate out of Texas. Texas being that beacon of liberty and freedom. Texas being the way that the United States of America has to continue to go. Texas being the place where the right policies for economic growth, prosperity, individual freedom, and liberty comes from. It's the reason why those men down that road at San Antonio, at the Alamo, stood on those ramparts so that we can be here today, these many years later. And so when we talk about this solution, when we talk about this guy, Booker T. Washington, it's very near and dear to my heart what he did at Tuskegee. Because my father was born over in Ozark, Alabama, and he spent a couple of years at Tuskegee University. My cousin graduated from Tuskegee University. My older brother was born at the hospital there at Tuskegee University. If you want to talk about how do you make Americans victors again with a big V and not victims with a little v, we need to tell the story of Booker T. Washington. And how interesting it is that we are in Black History Month, and the Texas Public Policy Foundation is naming their project, naming their initiative after the man I call the father of Black conservatism. And when you read that incredible book, Up From Slavery, when you understand his story, understand that here was a person that was born in slavery. Here was a person that walked from what is now present-day West Virginia all the way over to Hampton, Virginia. And in between, he stopped in Richmond to try to work and earn a little bit more money so that he can continue his journey. He slept under sidewalks in Richmond, Virginia, while he was working there so that he could continue on. Because what he understood, what drove him, was that thing that my parents taught me unlocks all doors: an education, a quality education. And when Booker T. Washington finished at Hampton Institute and he came back and started and opened up a school there in what we know as West Virginia, he was called back and they gave him an incredible task to go down south and establish an educational institution for recently freed slaves. Now, you want to talk about breaking the chains of economic enslavement, breaking the chains of bondage. Booker T. Washington had this vision for Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institution. It was education, it was entrepreneurship, and it was self-reliance. And when he looked at education, he did not look at it just as we call down south, the book learning. Understand that Tuskegee Institute was built by the students that were there. In other words, those students learned about agriculture because they grew their own food. Those students learned about carpentry because they built the buildings. Those students learned about brick masonry. And they were able to go out and do what Booker T. Washington thought was the most important thing. He did not believe that equality came through political agitation. He believed that equality came through economic independence and opportunity. Here's a quote from Booker T. Washington. At the bottom of education, at the bottom of politics, at the bottom of religion, there must be for our race, as for all races, economic independence. And how do we achieve that? We don't achieve that by making people more dependent upon the largesse that comes from government. We achieve that by making sure, first and foremost, every single child in the United States of America has access to a good quality education, and that every single parent has the right and the ability to choose where they want their child to be educated. That is personal for me, because Herman Sr. and Elizabeth Thomas West, they did not send me to C.W. Hill. They did not send me to John Hope, which were right there in the old Fourth Ward community where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. grew up. They scratched and they saved to send me to Our Lady of Lourdes Catholic School, which was right across the street from Ebenezer Baptist Church. And just understand, it was not the education that I got there in those walls, but it was the education of walking past Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s final resting spot every single day of my life from the first grade to the seventh grade. That's what we have to do. That's the message that we have to get back in. Because what Dr. King said, that we need to stop having the conversation about color of skin, but it is all about the content of character. And the only way we strengthen character is to strengthen what I call the equality of opportunity and cast aside the poison of equality of outcomes. That is what is coming from Washington, D.C. It is about entrepreneurship. Growing up in that neighborhood, maybe some of y'all have been down Sweet Auburn Avenue, and I remember seeing those incredible small businesses. I remember seeing the offices of doctors and lawyers. But about 6 or 7 years ago, I went back to my own neighborhood. I went down Auburn Avenue. The only thing that was open was a liquor store. And if you look at all of these incredible inner city communities, you don't see those small businesses there. You don't see the entrepreneurship. We have the regulatory reforms that we need so that people can open up their businesses. But most importantly, we have to have safety and security. And when you think about this criminal justice reform initiative of the TPPF, it does not matter if you've been incarcerated. We still need to make sure that we can invest in you so that you can return back and you can use your skills in the community that you came from to help rebuild that community. That's what TPPF has to do. And if we don't start rebuilding from the inside out, look at what is happening in Texas. Dallas is run by the other side. Houston is run by the other side. Austin, well, okay, y'all know about Austin. San Antonio is run by the other side. El Paso is run by the other side. Corpus Christi is run by the other side. The only major urban center in the state of Texas that conservatives, Republicans are in charge of is Fort Worth. It is only a matter of time in the great state of Texas that the urban population centers will overpower the rural areas and the mid-sized cities, and the next thing you know, the exact same thing that happened to Colorado can and will happen here in the state of Texas. That's why we're going to take the story of Booker T. Washington into all of these inner city communities all across the great state of Texas, because we're going to tell people you don't have to live in collective subjugation. You don't have to live in economic enslavement. That is not what Booker T. Washington intended. That is not what our founding fathers intended. That is not why men sacrificed and laid down their lives at the Alamo back in 1836. That's our challenge for this generation. That's one of the bridges of faith, another bridge of family, another bridge of education, another bridge of individual responsibility that will get us to that final goal of making sure that we have that conservative majority here in the state of Texas. Because we have got people to understand, got to have people understand what the meaning of liberty is. So I'm honored to be here with you, Brooke. I'm honored to be here with you in the great state of Texas. I'm honored to be here on this team. There is a fight that we have that's more important than any fight against ISIS. It's more important than any fight against Iran, Russia, China, North Korea. Because if we lose our homeland, it doesn't matter about the external enemies, because then they will come and overpower them. And if you really study ancient military history, an ancient history period, Rome eroded from within far before the barbarians came from without. And it was all about the largesse of the government. It was all about the laziness that crept in. It was all about, as it was said in Latin, panem et circenses, bread and games, to keep people distracted, to keep the people from understanding what liberty was. And it is no different today with the distractions that are coming down from Washington, D.C. Let us make our stand, because future generations will judge us upon whether or not we were successful in our Operation Market Garden. Let us go out and start seizing the bridges that enable us to get to the ultimate objective. And that ultimate objective is the preservation of the greatest nation that the world has ever known, the greatest constitutional republic in the history of the world, the place that we call home, these great United States of America, and the great state of Texas. God bless you all, and thank you.
Well, I'm not sure if you got that message or not, but I think Alan West just declared war on poverty. Y'all, thank you so much for joining us these last 3 days. We are so grateful. On behalf of our amazing chairman of the board, Wendy Graham, who is here, along with the rest of our board and the entire staff, including our newest TPPFer, Colonel Alan West, we want to thank you for your time and all that you did to spend the last 3 days with us. And hopefully, we now move forward as we set an agenda not just for Texas, but for America. God bless you all, and we'll see you next year.